Located on 225 acres in Garden City, Long Island, Nassau Community College, a member of the State University of New York system, has close to 20,000 students attend the school each year. The college mascot is Leo the Lion, and these are his stories of the school's absolute best and brightest who have graduated over the past 50 plus years. So let's catch up together as the Alumni Association of Nassau Community College proudly presents Lion Tales on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Welcome to Lion Tales. My name is Dr. Lynnda Nadien, and I am a director on the board of the Alumni Association at Nassau Community College and a proud graduate. I am here to celebrate the successes of our alum, and together we will share stories that will uplift, inspire, and often amuse you. Each week, I will introduce you to the alumni of Nassau Community College interested in sharing their experiences while attending the college and the secrets to their success. Look for many new and exciting events on the Alumni Association social media pages and share any exciting news with us on Facebook, Instagram, or on our webpage at ncc.edu/alumni, or find me on X at Dr. Lynnda Nadien. Did you know Leo the Lion is the mascot for Nassau Community College? Lions are ruled by Leo and fire. The male lions represent pride, while the female stands for teamwork. Together we are Lion Tales. Lions are leaders who lead with pride and conviction. Their roar is a symbol of strength. Today, I would like to welcome to Lion Tales John Blenn, class of 1980. John Blenn is a proud NCC alum and the founder of Long Island Music Entertainment, which was a publication for more than 7 years. John is a writer, actor, journalist, college professor, and currently he is the house manager at the Patchogue Theatre, using his many talents to bring the best of music to Long Island. He is an expert in music and in writing and publishing, and having written for numerous music publications. Welcome to Lion Tales, John Blenn, class of 1980.
Thank you. It's really great to be back here. It's interesting to be in these studios where it all started for me.
Yeah, so tell us about your decision to come to Nassau Community College, way back when. Was it 1978-ish?
Beginning of fall of 1977, right after I got out of high school. And the only thing I wanted to do at that point in my life was I wanted to be a radio DJ. I wanted to be that guy that introduced new music to the world, like Scott Muni used to do on WNEW, Once Upon a Time, and BAB, etc. And that's exactly where it started for me here. And I actually graduated the school at the tail end of 1979 before moving on to another school to wrap it up.
Now, I think about the great music that came out, during that period. What was going on the campus at that time? Do you remember hearing FM radio and rock music besides 90.3?
Oh, sure. I mean, back in those days, I kind of started with me because I have a brother who's 10 years older than I am.
Oh, wow.
So when I was 5, he was 15, and he was into everything in the 1960s. And, mid-60s, I was just kind of getting untracked. People always ask me, what's the first album I ever bought? And I said, the Beatles, 64. Uh-huh. And they say, oh, okay, when you buy them? 64. Yeah. And I actually remember going up to a counter as a little squirt, and the counter was taller than I was, and hoisting the album up on the top there and putting my money on it. And that was the first one I ever bought. He got me into it because of his love of music. And ironically, he didn't really go into that field, but I certainly did because of the impetus he started with. And the first article I ever wrote as a print journalist, which wound up becoming the major thrust of my career, was actually a review of Roy Buchanan on this campus.
Wow. So now when you bought that first Beatle album and you put it over the counter, what did you pay for that?
$2.99, I think,
yeah, $2.99.
Plus tax. Yeah, and that was probably full price at that point. It's probably about $2.49, $2.29 in those days if it was on sale.
Yeah, and that's something that, really, it's sort of like the journey begins. Something with the Beatles, there's always a connection where musically there's an inspiration. And then your brother's 15, so he's really being an influence on you because he's probably, listen, and you're just a little boy.
Oh, yeah. By the time I was in second grade, I was 8 years old, we were doing, they'd have show and tell, and they'd ask you to bring in an album. And at that point, my brother's 18. So everybody in my class is coming in with the Beatles or the Monkees or the Beach Boys. I'm showing up with May Blitz or the Damnation of Adam Blessing or Fat Mattress. And my teacher is looking at me going, where are you getting this stuff?
Yeah.
It's like an older brother. This is what I listen to. My mom made my brother come home every Thursday night after work. That was family night with me no matter what. And it happened to be the day that music was released in the stores. So he'd buy new albums that afternoon at work and come home, and we'd listen to those albums for the first time together. It's one of my fondest childhood memories.
Yeah, those are really, for me too as well, like with LPs and knowing certain albums that I had. My mother had Meet the Beatles, and I had it, and then she let me use that record and like all of her records that were in the little record bin, and I would flip through them. She had Harry Nielsen Schmielsen, and I would say, Mom, why did he put Jesus on the cover? Because it does look like Jesus, but it's Harry. And, all those, we were so influenced by the music. And also the radio, AM radio for little kids was a really big deal, riding in the back of the car with the radio on. Right. And, only when you become kind of like a rocker, then do you go to the FM when, you realize, wait a minute, there's a guy named Scott Muni and Dennis Elsis. How did that happen for you?
My older brother.
Yeah.
He was already into FM while I was still getting acquainted with AM and cassette recording the stuff at that point. And, off the radio when you're collecting your hits from AM radio. So because he was so far ahead of me age-wise, I was picking up his tastes and learning about things that I wouldn't have learned until years and years later.
Yeah.
So by the time I'm 11 and 12, I'm looking for the stuff that's off the beaten path and the unusual music that you aren't finding most places. And plus, as you know, being around college radio, that was a cool thing about being in college radio for me growing up was that we got to play the stuff that all of the commercial radio stations wouldn't touch.
Right.
So it was like everybody was trying to get discovered or get heard for the first time. You could help them while you were building your own career and growing as a person. So were they. So I developed, kinships when I was a young radio DJ with people I'm still friends with 50 years later, 45 years later.
Yeah. Did you happen to hear any songs at the time that by artists that actually, became pretty significantly well-known, or their music became well-known just from working at the college radio?
Well, the first person I really befriended on the college radio, the first person I ever interviewed on the air, it wasn't here, it was at my next stop, was Danny Elfman. And Oingo Boingo.
Wow.
And they had played a show over at Spit on their first American tour after they broke out of California. And my best friend, who was my engineer on the radio show I did, and I went backstage, and we didn't know him. We didn't have passes. And the security guys at Spit were like third door down on the right. They could have cared less because nobody wanted to go back to see him. Uh-huh. The audience wasn't that big and didn't really know who they were, but we loved them the second we saw them. So we invited them on the radio show the following day, and they said, yeah, if you come into Manhattan at the hotel we're at and drive us back out to Long Island, we'll come to your show. So that's exactly what we did. We sent somebody in to get them in the city, brought 3 members of Oingo Boingo out. And, of course, Danny Elfman now is probably the biggest movie composer in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, he does everything that Tim Burton does, but he's got probably another 50 films above and beyond that. And he just last year returned to actually doing his own original non-movie material for the first time in like 30 years. Yeah, so Danny's the guy I grew up with that I would have never found if I wasn't doing radio in college.
Wow, that's so amazing. So when your first experiences being on the campus here, how did you know about Nassau? Like, what did you do when you graduated high school? You just said, I'm coming to Nassau. What was that like?
It was really easy. Certainly it's a bargain, and I'm sure it's still a bargain tuition-wise now.
Yes.
But also, I grew up in East Meadow, so I would ride my bicycle over to the Coliseum to see shows. I would ride my bicycle over this campus even before I went here if I got wind of a show, because they would do shows on this campus from time to time. And if it wasn't it was a dry show over at the Rat and I could get in being underage, or I had good proof, then I'd get in to see something here. So I saw Melissa Etheridge once upon a time on this campus too, and
oh wow, yeah,
seen a lot of shows here over the years.
I remember the Ramones were here, and I remember them setting up the show like in the quad for that at Nassau, which was really interesting. And so, what about some of the courses that you were taking? Now, when you came in, did you just do straight liberal arts, or you
I just did straight liberal arts, but I loaded up as much as I could with anything that had to do with radio and also journalism.
Yeah.
I wound up having basically a major concentration in that here. And it's funny the way it worked out. I didn't even realize it by the time I put together the two schools that I went to and assembled all the credits, because my intentions was to be a communications major with a concentration in like broadcast, and I was a history minor. And I had no idea that between here and Hofstra, where I wrapped up, that I had enough credits to be a minor in journalism besides. And when I graduated and went out to look for a job, I went all over the Midwest, and I couldn't get arrested. I set up out in the Midwest, looked for as many jobs, Nebraska, Ohio, you name it. And they took tapes. They said, hey, thanks. They didn't call me back until a year later. But by a year later, I'd come back to New York, and I'd become the editor of Good Times Magazine, and really enjoyed being a writer and covering music from that angle instead. So the education that I started, again, with journalism here at Nassau also played into me being able to shift gears and get into another line of work very easily.
You are listening to Lion Tales on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Dr. Lynnda Nadien, and our guest today is John Blenn, class of 1980. So we're speaking about the convergence of journalism, music, and all of your interests, and having been on this campus. What about when, 1980 to me in music was a turning point, unfortunately, with the murder of, John Lennon in December of 80. And radio was a huge part of the grieving process and everyone getting through. Can you talk a little bit about what your experiences were in terms of moving into the field, music and journalism, and now you're having the opportunity to write in a music magazine?
Yeah, the interesting thing for me at that point was like 1981, shortly thereafter, is when I actually got to write for Good Times Magazine for the first time and launched my career as a journalist with a professional publication. But I do remember in 1980, in particular, after Lennon passed, a very good friend of mine, Phil Felice, who was a musician out here for actually still plays in several bands out here, as well as being a real estate attorney. He actually set up a candlelight vigil over at Eisenhower Park for Lennon. And it drew several hundred people. And I mean, the radio stations, everybody in the press was so nice about just getting the word out about the little small thing we were going to do. Yeah. And he got rolling. And I think he drew almost 500 people for it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was absolutely a huge turning point in music. And I think also a huge turning point in the world, where you kind of realized it's the end of innocence as we know it, that something like that would happen. Guys like the Beatles, it's like they'll live to be 150 years old. They'll always be here. But the world changed, and we realized that things were never going to be as innocent or as carefree again.
Right. How did that influence some of your writing at the time, in terms of story, topics, and where to go with music? Because it became, his death was sort of sensationalized at the same way, and people were writing all kinds of crazy things about rock music and just people's, I guess, in the enigma of being a Beatle or anything like that.
Yeah, I've always been that kind of a guy as a writer, that if everybody else is going to jump on the bandwagon to write it, I don't need to do it too. And you just don't really need another person's opinion on it.
Yeah.
So what I proceeded to do off of that was, certainly as I wrote for the Island, I covered a lot of the local bands in the clubs out here. I was always made it a priority to cover local talent. People who were unsigned, people who were trying to find their way to a deal, people who were filling up the clubs out here and performing. That to me was always priority number one. And on a higher level in terms of national acts, same thing. I was always looking for the up-and-coming act that was going to break out, become popular, or maybe they weren't going anywhere at all, but they needed a little bit of help and somebody to get behind them and to assist them and to shine a light on them. And I always felt that was the greatest part of the job. There was a guy out here many years ago by the name of Vinnie Marino. He was in a band called Transfigured Opera. And I tell the story a lot and to the students I've taught over the years. He was a musician that I worked with briefly for a record chain out here. And I wrote a review about his band right before he came to work at the store I was at. But he told me that his father was just about to kick him out of the house because he was very unhappy about him pursuing musician as a career. And his father read the article and the complimentary words we said about him, and his dad bought him a new guitar. And he called me up and he said, I just want to tell you, I was about to be thrown out at the curb, and even my mom could save me being able to live in my bedroom in my house. And because you wrote this review, my dad realized that maybe I do have some potential. Maybe I am supposed to do that. It changed his thinking. And I always thought if that happened 5 more times than that, then all the years that I spent doing it was worth the trouble because it was nice to help people.
And also, again, most students that are at Nassau really sort of their journey begins. And so once you were leaving Nassau and moving over to Hofstra and, to the next part of your degree requirements, did you find that you were well prepared leaving here going to the next level?
Absolutely. And I also made one of my closest friends in the world going here. Her name was Liz Garner, and she was also a communications major. She unfortunately passed away very young at age 48 back in 2005. But she had lost her eyesight at 29 due to diabetes and then lost her life eventually to breast cancer. And I mean, it was a hard road for her. But when she lost her sight, I was working with her at Record World. She had gotten me a job working for that chain, and she loved music too and had a huge collection of albums and was a very dear friend, loved the arts. You're doing a show somewhere, she's coming. You're doing a theater show, you're doing a comedy show, you're doing music, she's coming. She lived for it. When she lost her eyesight, she was pretty bitter and unhappy with the world before that happened. Yeah. And then when it did happen, it was like a complete change with her. She took a job teaching people how to work with guide dogs. She suddenly looked at the life from a totally different perspective of a positive way of approaching things and became the most inspirational person I think I've ever met in my life. And that friendship was forged right here in these very studios.
Wow.
And became an incredible friend through years and years and years. And when I first became a playwright and did my first play back in 1995, opening night, she shows up with 50 people. She's calling everybody in her book that she knows, you got to go with me to this. You got to go with me to this. If every artist, whether they were a playwright, actor, comedian, musician, if all of them had a Liz Garner as a friend, they'd all make it because she was so invested and had such a great love for those arts. And it was friendships like that here that prepared me for life, even beyond the courses. When you meet people like that in your life and your journey, it changes the way you approach everything. And I owe that to Nassau connecting the two of us.
That's amazing. So tell us about your acting career. How did that begin? Were you interested in acting before Nassau? And then how did you become, more interested in pursuing?
Well, everything has just kind of been a natural evolution of things. I did a couple of small parts here at theater, and it just kind of came up with somebody I knew was working on a play here, and they're like, "Oh, we just lost somebody. Can you do 3 lines, or can you do 4 lines?" And I was here a couple of times last year to see plays here on campus. I'll still come here regularly to see stuff, and the acting stuff, didn't really think that much about it until 1995. I finally. My wife said to me, "You know what? You're funnier than half the stuff you're reviewing here. You got to write something."
Yeah.
So I wrote a couple of plays, and I brought one to the stage over in Merrick, and I brought one to Arena Players, which used to be in Farmingdale. And the guy at Arena Players said, "Well, I think 75% of this needs to be rewritten." The guy at the theater in Merrick said, "You know what? Let's do this." And he was full steam ahead, as was. So I wound up doing that. By the time we got closer to doing it, I had a role with just a couple of extra lines in it. So I did that small part, not intending to do it. But as we rolled on, I've now done 92 plays. And as we went play by play, it's like, you know what? Let me do auditions. Let me see what shows up. And if I wind up stuck with a character that's got 5 or 6 or 7 lines, I'll do that. Couple of times I wrote vehicles that I wanted to star in myself that were closer to my heart than other things that I did. But for the most part, I just did small parts.
Yeah. And then do you seek out actors that will sort of portray it the way you have it in your head? And then how do you kind of develop that for them?
Well, you look to the schools out here and kids that freshly graduate. You put out ads, you network through everybody that you bump into. Hey, any young talent, a girl in this age range, a guy in this age range that fits this type of a part, so on and so forth. And we would put auditions in all the local local community papers out here around East Meadow, where I'm still centered these days. And we'd see what would show up and audition for the roles. But all of that eventually led to me actually doing a couple of film roles. I was been in a couple of films that Kevin James has done. Okay, and I've also done several films with a guy named Martine Guigui, who Martine just got nominated for his first Grammy a couple of days ago for the soundtrack for a movie he released earlier this year called Sweetwater. So he's another college buddy I met once upon a time. And, everybody you bump into leads you on to something else. And I didn't necessarily go looking for these things, that the opportunities presented themselves to do it. And when it was right and time it fit, we did it.
Yeah. And now, as a college professor, what are you bringing to this new group of students?
I've been teaching for Five Towns College, actually. I actually just left there very recently, but I had been there for 20 years and was there as recently as last fall.
Yes.
And the reason, when I went back there, they asked me to work on their theater, which I had been a general manager for several years. And I said, okay, with the agreement that I'm going to return to teaching. But they didn't post a couple of the classes that I had taught before to the last minute, didn't get sign up for it. And then this semester, it just didn't seem to make sense. I go, look, if I'm not going to teach, I don't really want to do the theater either. What I had done teaching for them was I taught concert production, artist management. I had also taught introduction to music business careers, journalism. Yeah. And then a pinch, I've taught compositional English, and I've taught history as well, where somebody dropped off of their teaching squad literally 48 hours before the semester started.
Yes.
And somebody said, well, you've been a journalist for 40 years. Can you teach compositional English? Like, I would hope so.
Yeah.
And here's the textbook, and you bail us out. So when they first hired me, they just hired me to teach the artist management and concert production. And I was at Westbury Music Fair in those days. And they said, look, well, you can do this first thing in the morning and then still get to work on time. We'll set the classes up to work around you. And I thought, I don't really know why they had zeroed in on me out of the clear blue. I had not put it out anywhere that I was looking to teach. But then I realized they wanted to be able to say, we have a member of Live Nation on our teaching staff. It's like, they want the credit. I get it.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they really knew whether I could do it or not. And obviously, I would like to think I could. I would have been around for 20 years if I didn't.
You are listening to Lion Tales on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Dr. Lynnda Nadien, and our guest today is John Blenn, class of 1980. Now, going back to managing the stage, really, I mean, at the Westbury Music Fair, they have huge productions and also concerts, and now being at the Patchogue Theatre, and there's such a great dynamic of artists that are coming in. How do you approach that work every day?
Well, when I was originally hired by Westbury Music Fair in late 99, I had my own publication at that point called Long Island Entertainment. I had been with Good Times for 14 years as their editor. My wife, who I had met in 1989 and married in 92, had her own graphics company. So it came to a point where I had to look out for her company, and I said to my old boss at Good Times, can't do advertising, sales, and also do editing for the paper, but I could still edit for your paper. Because, well, if you're not going to do both, I don't want you to stay here. And I was like, well, thanks. It's been nice to be here for 14 years. So I went to work for run my wife's graphics company because she got a job working for the town of Hempstead. And it was just too good of a job for her to pass up. She goes, if I take this, I got to have somebody run the company. And I was like, I'll take it over. I guess maybe 4 or 5 months into running her graphics company, I got a phone call actually from Mike Epstein from Dare Studios. Okay. And Mike said to me, John, if you ever do a paper of your own, I'll advertise with you. I hadn't really thought about it at that point. I went, okay, Mike, I'll keep that in mind. And then I ran into a couple of other people. They said, you ought to start a paper. And I was like, you think so? So one thing led to another, and then once it all made sense on paper that I could do, enough copies of it and be able to pay the bills with it, I announced I was going to do a paper, and in August of 97, out it came. And 2 years later, I walked into Westbury Music Fair, dropping off papers because they were an advertiser with me, and they said, do you think you could substitute as a publicist for us for a couple of months? Because we hired a publicist, but she's graduating school in 5 months. So I said, okay, I'll jump in. I have an assistant editor who can step up and watch out for me. I'll do it. And 2 months became 4 months working for them, and parted company. They hired the girl. And 2 months later, I got a phone call from the vice president over at Westbury Music Fair, a guy named Jason Stone, who just actually became the booking guy for the Bolton Center, which is reopening.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, Jason called me up and said, can I just talk to you for a couple minutes? I wanted to interview for the general manager's job. I thought he was kidding. And I was like, yeah, sure. Do I need to wear a tie? He goes, I don't care if you come in, wearing swim shorts. That's fine. He goes, I only need you to come in for like maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And I thought, all right, well, they must not really be serious about it. He asked me 3 questions. He said, my mom had just passed and said, you doing all right? And I was like, yeah, I'm okay. It's like, how's your newspaper going? It's going good. I got an assistant editor. He's taking a lot of the weight off my shoulders. Okay. And the third thing he asked me was how the club scene was out here and if everything was changing. A week later, he called me up. He said, so can you start next week? It was just about January of 2000. And I said, start next week? We didn't even discuss salary.
Yeah.
He puts a salary out at me. He goes, what do you think? And I go, well, yeah, I could work for that. He goes, okay, so can you be here next week? That's it? I go, I didn't think you were serious, but the interview was so informal. He goes, do you think I would have invited you in if you weren't the guy I had in mind? I guess I don't have that big of an ego because, no, that never did cross my mind. He goes, you were the guy we wanted. I just wanted to make sure you were interested in it. And
yeah, this is sort of the magic of Nassau Community College, where we somehow, it just leads us there, and it always goes back to that little beginning at Nassau where we're on that journey, and it really is incredible to think that these are how things happen.
Yeah, it's funny because the last like 11 or 12 jobs I had, they called me going, would you be interested in doing this job? I wasn't out looking for a job, but because of everything I've done over the years, and obviously, again, like you run into people in the business. I just, saw a guy, Johnny Cola, a couple of weeks ago, who's a great musician out here, a top flight guitar player, and another guy from being here at Nassau Community College. He was in that same radio group with me at that point. So, yeah, you just keep bumping into people that you ran into along the way. And it's funny. I think when you make up your mind more or less what area of business you're going to go into, you do see people all the way back to your early years over and over again because they all stay that course.
Yeah. And now what are your goals for the Patchogue Theatre as far as, selling out different shows and bringing in new acts, and what are some strategies? The house
manager's job there is just basically to ensure that everything gets executed okay in terms of the show and people getting in and out of the building okay.
Yeah.
As far as who's coming in, et cetera, things along those lines, that's the job of the person who is the executive director of the theater itself.
Yes.
Who's somebody I worked with at Westbury years ago. Her name is Michelle Rizzo-Berg. So she's the one who's going to make the calls on this is what we're bringing in or not what we're bringing in. But the nice part about it, like all the other jobs, the same thing with Westbury too, is that people always said you must meet really cool people. Not all that often because I've already met all of these people. So it's not like at this stage in my career, it's like, wow, I finally got to meet, this guy from Jethro Tull. Known the guy from Jethro Tull for 35 years or 40 years because I was a journalist. So it's more like seeing old friends pass through now, more so than it is meeting, new people from time to time.
Yeah. I would like to thank our guest, John Blenn, class of 1980. How can our listeners contact you?
Basically, I'm at the Patchogue Theatre most of the time, or else they can get a hold of me at MCAP, M-C-A-P, Theatre, T-H-E-A-T-R-E, at AOL.com. That is the theater company that I do address.
Thank you for being here today, John Blenn, class of 1980. I would like to thank you for being here. My name is Dr. Lynnda Nadien, and I serve as a director on the board of the Nassau Community College Alumni Association, and I'm a proud alum. Lion Tales is available as a podcast on iTunes, Android Podcasts, and Spreaker. More information is online at nccradio.org. Thanks for listening to Lion Tales on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.